Well, ladies and gentlemen, and he has several names, some of which were picked so he could stay one step ahead of the law. But he has been a manager in the Memphis territory and achieved his childhood dream there, but also is responsible for the Kentucky Fried Wrestling site and writings that you may have seen. And also he has managed to have somewhat of a real life in the last 20 years or so. And he is affectionately known to all the Memphis wrestling fans as Scott Bowden, but more precisely known as Travis Scott Bowden. Scott, you use multiple first names, and last person I knew that did that was the guy from Classy Motors in Knoxville.
It's all designed to confuse the masses.
Tell the people, because you grew up in Memphis, and obviously anybody that grew up in Memphis was a wrestling fan, but tell the people how you first got involved in the business, because it's fast. It's the classic hanger-on story we all went through.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan in the summer of 1977. The first series of matches between Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee, just captivated the attention of me and all my friends. I think they headlined 9 straight weeks, and the attendance jumped each week, because it seemed like every week it got a little more personal and the stakes got a little bit higher. And it's just tremendous. I mean, I think the first match drew about 6,000 fans, and by the time they shaved Beverly Dundee's hair, I believe there were about 10,000 fans there.
Well, and actually, if you remember, that was because they did do the sellout for Dundee's hair, but then they came back with Bev's hair and only did 1,000 people left. They did for those 9 shows. Those 9 shows literally drew. Mark James and I did the math, and I don't have it in front of me now, but somewhere around 60-something, 70-something thousand people over the course of a little over 2 months, just in one building in Memphis in the 70s to see those matches. And it was, but the point you made was they escalated it. At first it was, they went all the way from Lawler said, Dundee's such a punk, he's got to beat me twice in 15 minutes or he wins, all the way to losing their cars and their championships and their hair back and forth to each other. And it was classic.
And Mickey Poole's hair on the line.
But you remember the next week on TV, Lawler brings Mickey Poole out with a bad wig, folks, bad wig, and said, my grandfather was of Indian descent, and he gave me this little bottle of hair restorer, and I rubbed it on Mickey Poole's head, and he come out, look, his hair looks better than it ever did. Look at that, Lance. And he got the heat right back.
Well, and I loved it too. I think the barber who had shaved Dundee's head the week before, when they sat down to do Bev's hair, the fans started crowding the ringside area, and the barber said, I don't think I can do this. And he was almost going to, let it go off the hook, but the fans started pounding the mat. They want, they paid for a head shave, and they wanted to see a head shave.
Yeah, he would have. I think they told him that he would have started a riot if he hadn't shaved her head at that point, even though she was a baby, because that's when Lawler was 3 months away from really his first full-fledged babyface turn. They'd already gotten with him anyway, and just those matches got both guys over. That's what made Dundee's career in Memphis, was the program with Lawler. That's why they could run it in Jackson, Tennessee last year and still draw 1,500 people.
Well, and the thing was so personal. They really didn't like each other. If you look at it, Lawler and Dundee are they're completely different people. There actually was a lot of jealousy, animosity. They would each, even when they were baby faces, I think they would both kind of knock each other to the fans. So it was always kind of simmering. It was always kind of, bubbling underneath.
Hey, they used to, when they would go to the store in Louisville after the match, because the wrestlers in the 70s, every week at Tuesday night after the matches at the Louisville Gardens, would go get on 65 South, go back to Nashville, but they'd stop at Arthur Street. And because that was a one-stop shop, you had a McDonald's, a convenience store, and a liquor store, all right there. Lawler would go to McDonald's and look at across the street at Dundee and tell all the fans that had followed him, yeah, look at that Dundee. He's over there getting his beer a little drunk. He's he's probably gonna talk Thomas Marlin's ear off all the way home. Meanwhile, Kenny Boland's over at McDonald's with Lawler because Lawler's getting 2 Big Macs to help fuel his future heart attack. And then Dundee's over across the street telling all the girls that followed him and Lola Johnson and Kenny Boland's transportation. He's saying, yeah, look at that Lawler all the way home. He's going to be listening to that cassette of his record and what a great singer he is. And they were partners at the time. So
I know, right?
Everywhere knew as soon as they broke up, it was box office.
Absolutely. And I think, I think you and I talked about this recently. A big thing, Memphis didn't have a professional sports team. And I think Lawler being from Memphis, I mean, he, in effect, was our home team.
Yeah.
We were so emotionally invested in him, to go from a skinny, kid who went to Treadwell High School to the Southern Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. I mean, that pretty much makes you a legend, where I come from.
Well, and also in the mid to late 70s and early 80s, when before Lawler even got a percentage of the promotion itself, when he just had a piece of Memphis and was being paid as a main event talent in the territory by Jerry Jarrett, he was making the equivalent of what would have been $500,000 or better in today's money, and the top guy on television in his home territory and on network affiliate broadcast television in every market: Louisville, Evansville, Lexington, Nashville, Memphis, Jonesboro, Tupelo, every market in the area. My God, it was a fiefdom. He was the king. It was a perfect setup.
Absolutely. I mean, he without a doubt, was he was our hero. All my friends, we would actually kind of like do a cutout crown shaped goatee and stick it on our chins and the whole thing, and we would practice in the mirror. And I think before backyard wrestling was backyard wrestling, we would emulate what we saw on Saturday morning.
Okay, well now let me ask you this, as a sane, rational person for the most part, and we'll get back to Memphis in a second. But Boland and I did the same thing. We've told stories about we were at the Oldham County High School high school gym locker room with the wrestling mats down in the locker room. We knew a guy that was the trainer. He had the keys. So Sunday afternoons, in front of 7 people, we would engage in our professional wrestling matches, and we were trying to work. You did the same thing. You tried to work with your friends. When did backyard wrestling amongst friends become, I'm going to fucking throw you off the roof through a table that I've set on fire, and we're going to put 3 cardboard boxes from fucking Home Depot underneath to cushion the blow, and I'm sure you'll be fine. When did what happened?
Well, that was never the objective with my friends and me. Our objective was who can cut the best promo.
There you go.
I mean, if you stop and think about it, I mean, we had Lawler, Dundee, Valiant, Joe LeDuc, guys of all shapes and sizes.
Austin
Idol, just unbelievable. By the way, I need to clarify something. I think I told you the first card that I attended as a fan at the Mid-South Coliseum was January 19th, 1979, Lawler and Jackie Fargo in a stretcher match with Austin Idol and Mil Mascaras. And you said it was Pepe Lopez under the hood.
As a matter of fact, at the time, I said there's no way that Mil Mascaras came to, and goddamn it, later on I've talked to Jerry Jarrett, and it was him, and he did because Jerry Jarrett was friends with, not
Salvador Luderoth.
I was going to say Antonio Pena, and that was wrong. And then that he had talked him into doing it that way. And of course, he was there the one time, and so it really was him. So I ladies and gentlemen, Cult Cornette members, I apologize for thinking that they had a gimmick Mil Mascaras come to Memphis at one time. And
it only made perfect sense. Mil Mascaras was on the cover of every wrestling magazine, and it only makes sense for Memphis to bring him in as a heel and put him with Austin Idol
for the first time ever, and the only
right,
time.
Exactly. And and what's funny about this, they brought him in, and I'd seen him all over the magazines. I was really excited. I'd been pushing to go to the matches for a long time, so that was the first card that I attended, and I think they drew about just under 7,000 fans, and they carried Neil out on a stretcher. So the next week, they come back, Lawler and Fargo against Idol and Tojo Yamamoto, and the crowd jumped to 9,000.
Yeah, well, that's because they knew who Tojo was. Tojo was a big
Absolutely.
Hey, here, as a matter of fact, November 1979, in Lexington, of course, Rupp Arena in Lexington ran once a month, first Thursday of every month. And they would put a big card in there because it was a big building, and Lexington was drawing at the time, anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 people per show. So that month, the double main event was Bill Dundee versus Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA championship, and Jerry Lawler versus superstar Billy Graham for the CWA World Championship that Jared had started. And Lawler, of course, superstar Billy Graham that night and wins the CWA title. And I was there, and I recall, and once again, I'd have to check my exact notes, but I recall attendance about 6,000 people. The following month, single main event, Jerry Lawler versus Jackie Fargo at a grudge match, and it was 8,000 people because they had the chance for the first time to see the legendary Lawler and Fargo match. They didn't give a fuck about Nick Bockwinkel and superstar Billy Graham because they hadn't been on TV every week for the past fucking 5 years. Yep. And that's, and that's not any disrespect, obviously, to superstar Billy Graham, who was the biggest star in the business at one time, and Nick Bockwinkel, who was one of the greatest wrestlers for 30 years, but it shows how people forget that it wasn't necessarily your name and your talent as much as how you were featured on TV in places where they never saw you on TV. And well, everybody's on national TV. You can get sick of somebody in fucking 6 months.
Yeah, no, and I was talking to Lawler one time, about what was the key to their success during that time period, and he said that he and Jerry Jarrett both had a sign in their offices that said, personal issues draw money.
Yeah. And if the people believe that there's legitimate heat and conflict between two guys over something, they're more likely to come see it, especially when, a lot of those people still knew, the World Championship, it ain't going to change hands, not here in Lexington. But Lawler and Fargo beat each other into bloody pulp, so that was entirely possible. So anyway, but that made you a fan. But how did you eventually, because you were young in the early 90s, how did you eventually fall into actually getting on TV as a referee? You sent me a link. It wasn't the link, but I remember the instance. You were refereeing when I came back after I left WCW with the Fabs, and we turned heel. Stan and Steve turned heel on Lawler, and et cetera, et cetera. You were a referee for one of our TV matches. Was that when you had just started?
I just started, and that was I was actually doing a magazine article on Brian Lawler because he was going to Memphis State, and I was going to Memphis State, and I was a journalism major. So it's sort of like carrying on that same tradition. Eddie Gilbert took photos and wrote stories. You took photos and wrote stories for the Wrestling News. And I remember seeing you at ringside taking pictures and thinking, man, that guy's got the best job in the world. I want to be that guy. Before I even, heard you cut a promo. So I'd been sort of hanging around the backstage area and doing some interviews, and Jerry Calhoun, I think, had just gotten fired, and I was in the back, and Eric Embry, I think, had cut a promo on Lawler, and I was standing right next to Lawler, and Eric Embry goes, Lawler, I have never liked you. And Lawler looked at me and he goes, never liked me. And I go, that's a sign of a strong heel, Jerry. Double negative. And I cracked him up. And after, Calhoun left, he goes, hey, why don't you fill in and be a referee? Be good research for your article. And he gave me a kind of a quick referee 101 lesson in the dressing room, which was very surreal. And I was off and running. And
that's how a lot of times that's how you learned in Memphis, because a lot of times they would pull you in a room and say, do this, go now. What? Okay, shit.
Right.
Figured it out one way or the other.
Exactly. I mean, the Memphis TV show, I might get my interview 5 minutes before I was supposed to go out, and it would be like kind of 3 bullet points and go, and the very first interview I caught as a heel, Eddie Gilbert did me a huge favor because he knew that I was a big fan of the business, and it was my dream to be a heel manager. I don't think anybody knew that we would continue doing it. I think, it was just, I think my girlfriend at the time in college and some of my college friends were there, and we did a deal where Lawler had Eddie pinned, and instead of counting 3, I kicked Lawler in the back of the head and put Eddie on top and counted 3 really quick. And then from that moment, it was all improv. And the crowd, I mean, I thought they were going to riot. And I looked at my girlfriend and I was like, go, just go, get out of here.
Yeah, go now, run.
It was exhilarating. I mean, and that was in 1994. But the fans, the fans in Memphis and the surrounding areas, the spot shows were, just so much fun to go to. There might be 600 people there, but it was the entire town, Union City or wherever.
Oh, yeah. We were doing the same thing over at the other end in Smoky Mountain. That Tennessee was lucky enough to have the last 2 actual territories left until the late 90s. And the fans still responded to traditional pro wrestling and understood it was we could start that whole fucking conversation, but they were traditional pro wrestling fans that enjoyed traditional pro wrestling, and by gum, that's what we gave them. And it was fun for everybody. Unfortunately, it didn't last.
No, absolutely. And I would have fans, there was a guy, he was in the front row every Monday night, and he was the boot guy. He would throw his cowboy boot into the ring, and at one point, typically in the main event, and he would curse me up and down, hated my guts. And one night I was with my buddies, and we pulled into a convenience store to pick up a 6-pack, and he's behind the counter. And I don't notice him, and I walk up and he goes, "Scott, don't you know me?" And I went, and then there's like a split second where I recognized him, and he, bent down below the counter. And I went, "Oh my God, is he going to get a gun?" And he takes his boot off and puts it on the counter. He goes, "I'm the boot guy." And I'm like, yeah. He goes, "Oh man, I think you're great. Oh, can you sign this for me?" So I signed the boot and everything. And then the following Monday night, he's cursing me as soon as I walked to ringside.
Well, it was commonplace for managers to get pelted with footwear in those days. I can't tell you the number of times that somebody has thrown a shoe of some kind, either of just an old Walmart dress shoe or a fucking tennis shoe or whatever, at me. And every time they do it, I'd grab it and throw it under the ring.
Right.
And then because then I knew they had to walk home one footed, one shoed, because you couldn't get under the ring in those days because of security.
Actually, it's kind of funny you say that because at first, my first couple of interviews I did, I was in a starched polo button down and a nice sports coat. I mean, really, it cost a lot of money for these clothes, and I had a pair of Cole Haan shoes on that cost me probably like $300.
Oh Jesus!
And we did it. Yeah, we did a deal where
I don't think I spent $300 on shoes to wear to the ring in my career. It cost more to put the non-slick soles on them so I wouldn't bust my ass.
But I learned my lesson because Lawler and Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, got their hands on me. They ripped everything to pieces. They racked me against the ring post, and when they did that, my Cole Haan loafers went flying, and it looked like, it looked brutal. And God bless him, Corey Graham, the Dream Machine, one of my all-time favorites. It's such an honor to have managed him. He comes in, he goes, "Kid, are you all right?" I go, "Dream," and he leans in close. I go, "My shoes, get my shoes."
Oh my God!
And he would scurry out the ring to round up my shoes. Oh,
hey, I never got to manage Dream, but he was my riding partner when I still lived in Louisville. We've told stories about he'd ride back from Memphis to Louisville overnight on Monday night with me. We get in like 6 o'clock in the morning. But you got his last run there in Memphis. He came back in, what was it, 93, 94?
94, yeah.
And so if you got to manage him, what was Dream like at the ring working with him?
Well, I was in the audience. I was in the cheap seat when Lawler came back from the broken leg and headline against Troy under the hood as the Dream Machine. And they strongly insinuated that it was Dusty Rhodes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And, he could cut a promo just as good as Dusty, if not better. So, the great bump taker, hell of an interview, and really just a hell of a guy, and really took a liking to me. And I remember I let him down one time. I got hit with a Coke bottle. They put a Coke bottle in an oven for about 2 hours, and they assured me that it wouldn't hurt. so it was just kind of trusting. And it looked like the Kennedy assassination. They hit me over the head with the Coke bottle. My head went back. Wait a
minute. Did they dip it in the cold water after they baked it?
Well, I don't know. And at the time as a kid, I'm 20 years old in the business. I'm going, okay, all right.
Oh yeah. Hey, yes, said Mr. Pot to Mr. Kettle. I know what you mean.
Right. So anyway, so the following Saturday, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I go to TV and I don't have any bandages on. And I walk in, and Troy sees me, and he grabs me, flicks me up against the wall, and he goes, "Kid, you know I like you, right? You know I like you." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "If this were 10 years ago, I'd be beating the shit out of you right now. You got a Coke bottle busted over your head, and you don't come with anything, nothing, kid. Think." And he hit me on top of the head. I went, "Okay, all right, I'll think."
Hey, I picked Dream up one day to go to Evansville from Louisville. I dropped him off the previous day at the Days Inn in Louisville, and we'd had the matches that night in Louisville, and he didn't get any juice. And the next day I picked him up to take him over to Evansville, and he's got a big gig mark on his head. I said, "What?" He said, "I just practicing in the mirror last night."
Oh. Hey, Jim, I'm not even kidding you. I told this to one of my friends. We had a big, Pier 6 Brawl, almost like a Tupelo concession stand kind of deal going in the back of the Mid-South Coliseum. And Randy Hales put us on. He goes, "Get yourself together. We want to do an interview right now, in the heat of the moment." And Randy looked at me and he goes, "Where's Dream?" And I go, "I don't know. Let me see if I can find him." And I'm looking, I can't find him. And I walk past this area in the dressing room, and I hear this smack. I mean, it sounds like somebody's beating the shit out of somebody. And I look in there, and Dream goes, "Oh, are we ready? Are we ready? Do the promo?" And then one last time punched his eye shut. Unbelievable.
Well, shit had to look good. Depending on whether the house was up next week or not. If the house was up next week, everybody's money was down. See, it wasn't the pampered existence that the children lead today.
Yes. And one of the, Larry Latham, one of my all-time favorites. Larry was so good. I mean, I was when I was refereeing, kind of a punk kid, but I've been watching the matches for a long time, and whenever they were kind of stuck for a finish, Larry would turn to me and he goes, and be like, "What do you think?" And I would, kind of give him an idea or whatever. And, he listened to me, and he was such a good guy. And he would always warn me. He was like, "I'm going to come after you with a chair. I'm going to have to lay it in there." And I go, I know. And it was sort of like the deal. If it took your head off, if it broke your nose, if it broke your arm, good for the business.
Yeah, well, everything. Of course, the Moondogs carried that principle as far as it could possibly be carried. If people started to go, "Hey, you know what? Fuck the business. I've got brain damage here." Fuck, I had to ring the bell on him. I told this story on the show a while back, so I won't tell it in detail, but I had to ring the bell on him once when I brought him over to Smoky Mountain. They hit this fucking job guy that worked at the Circle K Mart in part-time and wanted to be a wrestler. Larry hit him over the head with the chair so hard. I said, "Well, he's obviously dead. He's a vegetable if he ever lives and walks again." I told Brad Hildebrand, I said, ring the fucking bell. Just that's enough. He can't get back up anyway. He was going to try.
Right.
That was, ay. But, hey, speaking of stiff shots, because you sent me the clip and we the angle with Frank Morrell. It was Lawler, and I saw it was just a clip, but it was a 6-man, and I saw Lawler and Dundee against Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert, and you were managing Tommy and Doug, and Frank Morrell was the referee. And finally, he'd had all he could stand. He can't stand no more when you're involved. And Frank turns you around, and we did the same thing probably about a year before that. Me and Brian Hildebrand and Frank and Randy Hales. Well, it was probably a couple years later, maybe 95, 96. Anyway, point is, good Lord, Frank would connect with that combination right cross broad arm to the chest, and you think, what the fuck? He was stiffer than anybody except Thomas Marlin.
Absolutely. And when I saw that promo, I was watching back there in the monitor, and to me, those were some of the best moments. I had so much fun. Backstage on Saturday morning, watching the monitor and watching the promos. Frank was so fired up. I was like, what? He's going to kick my ass?
Well, and you raked him over the coals with all the old jokes. And the senior citizen. Oh, my God. But and once again, that was the beauty of Memphis wrestling, because as long as the people believed they could take a manager against a referee in a match, as long as they believed that you legitimately didn't like each other and you were going to fight, they were interested in seeing what was going to fucking happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And me showing no respect whatsoever.
Yes.
Frank, not only a referee, but a former wrestler and a headliner. And just total disrespect.
And he played it straight on that one too, because Frank was not an Austin Idol level promo, but he was mad and yelling in that face. Frank
did that in one take. He did that in one take.
And nobody ever asked for a second take back then unless you cussed. If you stammered and had a series of small strokes on the air, they wouldn't ask you to do it again unless you cussed. It just whatever the fuck. But that was and Frank was just, I don't want to say that Frank was ugly, but Frank was fucking ugly. And just people believe, well, he's going to kill this fucking guy. Frank was not above ha-ha. He was playing it straight there, but I managed him in Georgia in the summer of '83 in that.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was him and Jerry Novak, the bounty hunter, against, I think, Bobby Fulton and Terry Taylor in a tag team match one night at a spot show in front of about, I would say, 112 people, back when that was embarrassing. And the finish was some way or another, goddamn, he went for the claw because he had the claw in the black glove, right? But the baby face ducked, and he got the fucking claw on me, and his fucking hand got stuck. He'd do it at the turnbuckle sometime, but this night we wanted to kill the town because we knew we weren't going to be back. So he got it on me, and he got it stuck, couldn't get it off, and he's put his foot on my chest. He's trying to pry the fucking claw, his own hand, from my head, and they rolled him up, and oh my God, it was fucking. That's what we're missing in wrestling these days. Again, is spot shows that you don't care what happens. And the spot shows were so much fun, and the road trips. I would ride a lot of times. I would ride with Lawler, and Bruno would ride with us sometimes. And I remember it was around, I think it was December of '95, and we were going to Nashville, and Bruno looked over at Lawler and he goes, "Hey Jerry, did you get Vince anything for Christmas?" And Lawler goes, "Oh God, Bruno, I mean, what do you get a multi-millionaire like Vince McMahon for Christmas? No, I mean, I sent him a card." And Bruno goes, And Lawler goes, "Well, why? Did you get him something?" He goes, "Oh yeah, I sent him a ham." And Lawler goes, "What you mean, like a honey baked ham?" He goes, "No, a canned ham." And I swear, I thought Lawler was going to run off the road. He's like, "Bruno, you idiot." Hey,
you said Vince McMahon a canned ham.
Somebody probably carried that into Vince's house. It is from Harvey Whippleman. It's a canned ham. He probably fed it to his giant dogs.
Oh, man.
I'm not surprised he didn't feed Downtown Bruno to his giant dogs.
I know, right?
Oh my God. But you got to, the thing is, Bruno's heart was always in the right place. He was always anxious to help. Before we went on the air, Brian and I were talking about something, and then I buzzed you about it earlier. Also, we want to get, because you have a couple of dressing room skirmish stories, but everybody's heard the news over the past week. Apparently at SummerSlam, Chris Jericho and Brock Lesnar got into a skirmish, as they say, at the gorilla position over apparently. Well, Brian, you tell me. Apparently, Jericho was concerned because Brock had just caved Randy Orton's skull in on pay-per-view, and Brock took exception to Jericho getting in his business and being concerned about anything by saying "fuck off, you pussy" or whatever. What do you hear, Brian? What is the story here?
Reportedly, and this changes, by the second, but reportedly, Brock versus Randy, they agreed on a hard way juice job where he would get some elbows to the head and bust Randy open, and he certainly did, and it was pretty gruesome. Jericho was watching, was offended, ran to Gorilla, asked a few people, including Michael Hayes, what happened, and no one would tell him if it was a work or not. And then he went at it with Brock backstage, got in his face. Brock kissed him and said, "Kiss me back, bitch," or "hit me," one or the other. And they went face to face, and then they got broken up. And apparently Vince yelled at Jericho for being unprofessional. And Jericho said, "Well, Brock's being unprofessional. He's the one who just hurt Randy." And Vince said, "It's a work, you idiot." And I guess the big question is, did Jericho block Brock Lesnar on Twitter now?
All right, now that's between you and Y2J. But Scott, before I pitch this to you, let me just say to all of these numbnutses involved, that's why they came up with the fucking blade, idiots. What the fuck? Seriously? I know they say, "Oh, we don't get juice, we don't do blood anymore." Guess what? You just did blood. But now they can say, well, the reasoning apparently, I guess, that they think they can get away with this when they're not supposed to do blood is they're not supposed to do intentional blood. But he was busted open, even though he was busted open intentionally, and you still had blood. But it wasn't self-inflicted. Another guy did it. Motherfucker, do what Brett used to do. He was an artist with the fucking gig, and just goddamn use the blade, get some fucking color, and tell people you got busted open accidentally. And then everybody prospers, while at the same time you got exactly what you just got, except without a goddamn crevice the size of the fucking, Red River Gorge in fucking Randy Orton's head, you dumb fucks, all of you. And I appreciate Jericho taking up for one of the boys, especially against Brock, who probably doesn't really give a shit and doesn't care about the business and could give a shit whether he ever wrestles again unless somebody pays him a lot of money. So I appreciate Chris's intent there. But what the fuck? Why would you hard ways used to be used to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that wrestling was not a work. I think that horse has left the barn. So a well-placed fucking blade job will do will creates the same fucking aura, and then just say, "Oh, no, I didn't do it because it worked for Brett." But Scott, you've been around some dressing room skirmishes in your time,
right?
Tell us about one. No, I'm trying to lead you to the Sid story there because it's quite fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you the Sid story, but really quickly about Blading. I was booked in a hospital elimination match, and I think Memphis was the only territory. I guess essentially it was the first blood match, and I think there were four of us.
That's an old Nick Goulas stipulation. The hospital elimination match, when you bleed, you are eliminated, and you have to go back to the locker room, and the last unbusted open team or person or whatever in the match is the winner. So, yeah, but they used to call it the hospital elimination match, which I loved. I loved when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah, no, it was a great step until I was booked into it, and I had never gigged. I'd never gigged before, and I had sort of, I was going to Memphis State and doing this, and I was just like. I told Randy House, I go, "I noticed you booked me, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it." And Lawler, I got to the arena, I got to the Coliseum Monday night, And Lawler goes, "Hey, Scott, can I talk to you for a minute?" I went, "Yeah, okay." So Lawler and I went into the dressing room, and after about 5 minutes, I couldn't wait to get out there and get it. He had me so fired up. He's like, "It's going to be the greatest thing ever. No one's seen Scott Bowden bleed yet. Oh my gosh, it's going to be fantastic." And man, I was so nervous. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to fuck it up. I'm not going to do it right. And I think Doug Gilbert goes, "Well, do you want me to do it for you?" And I'm like, "No."
Yeah. I'll do it myself. Thank you very much.
And I am proud to say I hit a fucking gusher. And so much, and I was eliminated. I went back to the dressing room, and Lawler goes, "Hey, we got to get you back out. This is fucking tremendous. You got to get back out."
We got to have people see more of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's how stupid I was. Because my gimmick, if somebody, maybe if a girl or a midget had done it, it might have worked. But if it was always, if one of the guys had actually beaten me bloody, that would pretty much finish me off, right? So that would mean just get me the fuck out of there. So no booker ever asked me to get juice on purpose. The first 5 times I bled in the ring was accidental. And then finally, when the first time I do get fucking juice with a blade, it's my idea. I pitched it to Dusty myself. That's how stupid I was. And then that's
with the Paul Lee angle.
Yeah, and
with the telephone.
It was so cold in the studio. I whacked it once and nothing came, so I panicked and whacked it 3 more times, and it all came at the same time. And Dusty after was like, "Kid, I said a little juice." Almost got it kicked off television, but.
Oh man. Okay. Well, all right. I got to tell you the Sid story.
Oh, go ahead.
So Sid, I guess it was January of '95, and I guess at Starrcade '94, I think they were going to have Sid and Vader. I think Sid was saying he was the master of the world, and Vader was the ruler of the world, or whatever. And I guess they were going to unite the WCW belt and the NWA belt, right? And I believe they had picked Sid to do this, and they were going to go with him. And then I guess when they were on that tour, he and Arn Anderson got into that fight.
Oh yeah,
and scissors were involved and the whole thing, and Sid ended up getting fired. So instead of having the WCW title and the NWA World title, he's back in Memphis in January, trying to keep his nose clean. I think Vince had said, go to Memphis, 6 months, stay out of trouble, and maybe we'll bring you in. So Sid's not happy, right? And so, you don't mean. And I'd never met him before, but we got to talking, and we were watching all the matches that night, and I don't know, we were kind of joking around. I went, "Oh, he understands me. He understands my sense of humor." And we're watching a match. I think Lawler's in a 6-man tag with Doug Gilbert. And something happens in the match. And Doug, I love Doug, but he was so temperamental, just like Eddie. And he took a personal affront to something that Lawler did and just left, walked out of the ring, and went to the dressing room.
Wait a minute, he left the match itself?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. Okay, that's a first. I've never seen that.
Went to the dressing room and started changing his clothes. He was going to get out of the building, and Lawler cuts him off. Lawler goes back there, and he's like, "God, that's so unprofessional. What the fuck were you thinking?" Screaming. And Sid goes, he looked at me and he goes, "Man, it's getting kind of heated back there." And I go, "Yeah, hope not any scissors back there."
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And it was like time stood still. And those cartoons, smoke coming out of the music.
He looked like Milton the Monster, right? I'm Milton, your son.
It was probably the best promo that Sid ever cut. He was shaking and trembling and looked me dead in the eye and he goes, "What the fuck is that supposed to mean?" I went, nothing. I just, hope there's nothing sharp back there, And he's like, "Get the fuck away from me!" And we had heat for about 6 weeks. Luckily, he was a heel, I was a heel, so there was no chance of him getting his hands on me. And then we had a softball game at Chick Stadium, the heels against the babyface. and I was a pretty good baseball player. And, you know, I go up to bat and Ted's like, don't fuck it up, Bowden. And he's just, you know, fucking with me left and right. And I fucking hit it and almost hit a home run and get a triple. And I come back and I got in Ted's good graces with a triple in softball.
Oh, wait, there had to be softball involved.
Yeah, but that's
somehow. So basically, you saw Doug Gilbert walk out of the ring and quit, and Lawler at him screaming, and you decided, I've got to steal the thunder by angering the old bigger lunatic in the fucking room here.
Oh, unbelievable.
Oh, my God. Well, hey, tell people a little bit about Kentucky Fried Wrestling, because I've loved the columns that you've got. I don't go to the internet a lot, but when I do, there's certain places I like more than others. And some of them we won't talk about here, although our producer, Styles Bitchley, recently did a mass subscription to a lot of porn sites. He's been sharing them. But anyway, how did Kentucky Fried Wrestling get started?
Well, I started doing it for Kevin Smith had a website, a Movie Poop Shoot, which you know, the director Kevin Smith.
Yes.
Movie Poop Shoot.
I thought it was my former next door neighbor, Kevin Smith. The fuck.
Anyway, and so they asked me to. It was funny. They asked me to write a column about. I guess it was the very first TNA show with Jerry Jarrett and Jeff Jarrett. And I titled that column, because it was Jerry Jarrett, I titled it Kentucky Fried Wrestling. And it was, you know, I don't know, I guess it was a good column. And Kevin Smith didn't even follow wrestling, but he read it and liked it and asked me to continue doing it. And the next thing I know, there's a masthead that says Kentucky Fried Wrestling. I guess they thought that this was just going to be an ongoing feature. And it worked out. You know, because I got into journalism really because of the aftermath and wrestling news. You know, I would comb through that stuff. I could read at a very high level early on, and it was strictly because I wanted to read wrestling magazines. I started collecting them in '77. I think I saw a wrestling magazine in an episode of Charlie's Angels, and I went, "Wow, I didn't know they had wrestling magazines." And so I went to 7-Eleven, and to me, Jim, you know, I love there's an art to those stories and the columns. They fueled the storylines, even when I doubted, you know, sometimes it real or whatever. A lot of times those aftermaths, they were so well written. They were like Sports Illustrated. But they did such a good job of convincing me that this was a sport. And one thing that Memphis doesn't get credit for, you know, Memphis, you know, you think, oh, fuck, you know, hardcore before ECW, all that shit, gimmick matches, Darth Vader, Kojak,
Spider-Man.
You know, all these guys. All these guys wrestling. But when they switched gears and they put Lawler on that trajectory toward the world title, and the contenders, and they built up Bockwinkel and Briscoe. Nobody did it better than Memphis. And I love that part of it. I love the sport aspect of it. I would like, you know, memorize the ratings and wonder if Lawler lost, you know, in a tag match. Okay, will that affect his number 9 ranking?
Well, yeah, but, and that's the thing is that the magazines also, they made stars in your eyes so that when guys came to the territory, you could say, because there was no national TV, so you could say, oh, I've read about him in the magazines. He must be a big name star because he's in the magazines, rather than who's this schlub but I've never seen before. They came in with a reputation, which you know, you can't really do anymore. But of course, I had my suspicions about that apartment house wrestling. I seemed like I just didn't know whether that was. I knew the story was that it was a group of rich millionaires that wanted to remain anonymous, but I just still wasn't sure about the veracity and the credibility of apartment house wrestling. Even though if it wasn't for apartment house wrestling, Brian Last's mother would have not been able to support him in his younger days.
How'd you know about that?
Well, I got some of the magazines and looked, and she looks just like you, except with a wig.
And I believe that was Sports Review Wrestling. And I remember kind of being a little ashamed when I would put that on the counter Although I don't know why, because the women were typically really hot, but
Well, hey,
that's neither here nor there.
The old 67-year-old pharmacist's wife that was checking you out didn't appreciate. Hey, I was when I first got into business, and I had these friends who were just a couple years younger than me that went to the matches in Evansville, and we went out to get a pizza afterwards, and we're reading the newest wrestling magazine, and the manager comes over and says, "You got to put that away, young man." What are you talking about? We don't allow that type of magazine. I said, a wrestling magazine? He looked at the cover of it, but he had seen one of those ads for the blow-up dolls as we were flipping by. And he's like, I thought it was a porno magazine.
Right.
Well, and we
I think prior to 76, the Aftermags were run just about an ad for anything.
Well, we can't blame Wonderful Willie Apter now, because the apartment wrestling, that was a Stanley Weston thing. They wanted to get the circulation.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
But anyway, back to Kentucky Fried Wrestling. So tell the folks where you can find it and some of the things that are on it, and et cetera. We veered away from your journalistic career there.
Well, you can check it out at Kentucky Fried Wrestling, or I prefer Kentucky Fried Wrestling, because if you grew up in Memphis, traditionally it was called wrestling, and basically just highlights my career to an extent. I was in the business for about 3 or 4 years as a referee. Actually, my first job was setting up the ring. I was working on an article, and they were like, "Hey, you're going to be back here, set up the ring." So I did that, and then refereed, and then as a manager. And at that time, Memphis was starting to receive some money from McMahon. So during that period, I worked with The Rock, that's Flex Cavana, Steve Austin, Mick Foley. And it's funny about those guys. Out of all the guys in the business, the 3 nicest I ever met were Rock, Foley, and Austin.
Yeah, I can see that.
Absolutely. And Austin, every time I saw him, he always had the same set of clothes on. He was so poor. I mean, all that stuff about him, eating a bag of potatoes, that's a shoot.
Well, actually, that's what got Danny Davis over with Steve, is because at one time, Danny Davis talked Steve Austin out of quitting the business when he was there eating that bag of baked potatoes for a week and whatever. And he said, "No, kid, you've got something. Stick with it." And
I tell you what, Danny Davis, that's a great talent there as well. That whole run with the Blonde Bombers with Wayne Ferris and Larry Latham.
Oh my God! And if it hadn't been for Danny also and Ken Wayne, I wouldn't have been as well versed in managing tag teams as I was, because they were so slick and so good, and their teamwork was so intricate that I learned how to pick up on that type of thing. So it got me ready for the midnight. But anyway, well, so you do the website now, and you dabble your finger in other things, some of which we may hear about in the future. But what have you been doing in your real life? Do you just emerge from under an overpass every now and then? But what do you do in your real life that we should look out for, Scott, that you need all these different names for?
Well, I went to Los Angeles in '97. I think we did a deal where Mabel, it was right before he got called up to WWE, or maybe he had gotten fired. I don't know. But we did a deal where he, came off the top rope and elbowed me, and it looked like it absolutely killed me. And that was, as far as Memphis fans were concerned, that was the last they saw me. I moved to LA, and I was a journalism major, and got into that really because of wrestling magazines, and ended up working for an ad agency. And for the last 3 years, I've worked for Disney and Universal doing film promotions.
Disney and Universal. You could be when you return to managing in professional wrestling, you could either be like one of the mascots at the theme parks, or so like that suddenly. Well, because it worked for Hacksaw Duggan. It got him all when he was the gorilla at Christmas, right? When Duggan was the gorilla at Christmas and everything, it got no. Anyway, I guess we ought to wrap this fucking thing up. We'll sit here and natter at each other all day and giggle like schoolgirls with shiny new vibrators about our old Memphis stories. But Brian, did you have anything you wanted to ask Scott, or you've once again left the interview up to me?
Now, one question for you, Scott. You grew up watching Memphis wrestling and, of course, watching Lance Russell, the greatest wrestling commentator of all time. What was it like for you when you actually got to work with him?
It was one of the biggest thrills. I mean, and I know that sounds cliche, but Lance carried me. You know, it was actually, a lot of people were surprised. They were like, God, you know, that was actually a pretty good fucking promo for a first promo. But I was like, hey, well, I should get up there and do a fucking good promo. I mean, I've been watching Lawler, Hart, Dundee, you know, all these guys for years do these great promos. But Lance, and there was one thing that there was a little moment that happened in the thing, and Lance was talking about Eddie Gilbert, the fact that I helped Eddie Gilbert, and Lance goes, I just want to tell you something, young man. People judge you by the folks you hang out with. And I looked at Lance and I just kind of went, okay, Dad. And the look on Lance's face was priceless. And he came up to me afterward. He goes, I got to say, that dad stuff was great. I go, I know, right? It wasn't great.
Hey, Scott, you were a little hard on the Beaver last night.
Oh, I do have to say that one time I did piss Dave Brown off.
Okay.
Randy Hales and I were in a feud, and I guess people have speculated. You know, Randy is not the most polished promo in the world, and I guess people have speculated maybe he might have a learning disability. And he told me, he goes, Scott, when you go out there, I want you to say that I'm retarded and that I'm a figurehead. And I said, okay. And boy, I said he was Eddie Marlin's illegitimate retarded son in Jonesboro. And Dave pulls the mic away from him. He goes, hey, don't say that word. And I go, what word, Dave? Retarded?
Jonesboro?
Retarded? Yeah. I go, nobody ever noticed because everybody in Jonesboro is retarded. And he's like, quit using that word. And I thought he was working with me, but he's really upset about this. And we go to the back, and Dave comes up to me and goes, hey, what the fuck was that? And I went, wow, Dave Brown just said fuck?
Dave, I don't think I've ever heard that before. Well, you know, Dave is noted as being a very nice man and very straight-laced. And actually, when I went down and Sin and I were appearing for Power Pro Wrestling for Randy in 99, Dave Brown was scared to death that Sin was going to do something on television to get Channel 5 kicked off the air by the FCC. And she's in there taking press slams from fucking Ali, the Steve Sharp, the big baby face they had at the time. It looked like Ahmed Johnson, and she's getting press slammed and everything, and Dave was just having a fit over that. But anyway, all right, I guess we ought to wind up this week's edition of The Experience, but check out Kentucky Fried Wrestling and pronounce it wrestling like me and Scott do. And go back on YouTube and watch Scott's work with the illustrious Moondogs, among many others, and see where Larry Latham didn't get a chance to cave his fucking head in. Unfortunately, there's no video available of the promo that Sid Vicious cut on him, but you can probably imagine that one for yourself. And Scott, we will probably have you back soon for a part 2 if you have any more news to impart about a project you're currently working on. But until then, for all of the various things that we have talked about today here on The Experience, for Styles, our producer, Mr. Co-host Brian Last, the incomparable Travis Scott Bowden, man with many names, I'm Jim Cornette. We'll see you next week.